has done, particularly when he was chairman of the all-party parliamentary group on human trafficking, that there are those youngsters who sadly do find themselves, when in local authority care, actually being trafficked again. This is appalling. I'm afraid over the years this country can take no comfort at all from the record it has for children in local authority care. I think there are many appalling cases that we have seen as a result of that. The child advocate trials, I hope, will show us where best practice is and how we can best support these children.
Mr. Gordon-Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on that particular point, and welcoming the Home Secretary's report, might I suggest that one of the things the inquiry panel might look at is the adequacy or otherwise of multi-agency activity in pursuing that particular point. But can I just pick her up, if I may? She's said now twice about the investigator had determined that the files had not been removed deliberately or inappropriately. She's also said that the record of housekeeping on this matter has been varied. So can she tell the House how she knows that, or how the investigator determined that these files were not removed deliberately or inappropriately? And if she cannot tell the House that, will the inquiry look specifically into that issue?
The review, which will be taking place under the direction of Peter Wanless as Chief Executive of NSPCC, as I have indicated earlier, with the support I indicated earlier, will precisely be looking at the investigator's review and to see whether that was conducted properly, whether the information was properly dealt with, whether we'll look at what the Home Office did in relation to files and so forth. So it is a matter that will be looked at by the review of the review.
Dr. Philip Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Home Secretary for her important and measured statement. With the apparent loss of in excess of around 100 Home Office documents that are relevant to this statement, current testimonies from past victims take on a greater importance. In view of that, is the Home Secretary satisfied that the police, in particular CEOP, have the necessary powers to protect victims from ongoing blackmail? In particular, I gather that there are general concerns around the potential use of photographs and films from the 1970s and 80s, which have now been digitalised in order to discourage victims from coming forward.
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point, and if I may, I will look into the very specific issue he's raised about the films or videos from the 1970s which have been digitised. I am satisfied generally that CEOP does have the powers that it needs, but he's raised a very specific issue, and I will look into that and get back to him.
Mr. Barry Gardner.
The three principles of justice for victims, transparency of process and learning the lessons are absolutely right and necessary. But does the Home Secretary not consider that they may not be sufficient unless there is a care package of support that is attached to the inquiry, because otherwise victims may still feel reluctant in coming forward? She referred earlier to it being for other departments to look at that. I believe it's for hers.
It is, of course, right that it is the Home Office that is establishing the inquiry panel, and we'll be discussing with the inquiry panel what they consider will be necessary for them to be able to ensure that they can undertake their investigations and review in the best possible way.
Mr. Robert Buckland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As someone who called for an overarching review, may I warmly welcome my honourable friend's statement. Does she agree with me that one of the possible causes for the seeming culture of impunity that existed in the 70s and 80s was the fact that the courts made no adjustment whatsoever for the evidence of children and young people, and there was a statutory requirement that juries in England and Wales had to be warned about the absence of corroborative evidence in sexual complaints?
My honourable friend's experience of matters relating to the courts is, of course, greater than mine. But I think he is absolutely right that one of the things that has developed over the years has been a willingness from the criminal justice system as a whole to recognise the need to put in place more specific support for those vulnerable witnesses to ensure that they are able to actually bring their evidence forward. Of course, justice requires that evidence that people give is challenged and appropriately challenged, but it is important that over the years, not just in issues relating to child abuse, but in some other matters as well, of course, have recognised the need to make sure that witnesses are not put off coming forward by what is going to be their experience at trial.
Kerry McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker. I'm still a little unclear as to the scope of the oneness review into the 114 missing files. The Home Secretary described it as a review of the review, but will it have the power to go further and take evidence from other people who may know something about the missing files that wasn't the subject of the original investigation in 2013?
I have put a copy of the terms of reference of the review in the library, so it will be possible for the Honourable Member and others to see those terms of reference. I might just say she described it as a review of the 114 files. It's not a review of the 114 files. It's a review of all the work that was done by the investigator to see how the Home Office handled the letters from Geoffrey Dickens and other information that came into it to ensure that it was handled appropriately, and will be looking, as I indicated, to other matters that relate to the prosecution, police and prosecuting authorities. But it will, in relation to the 114 files, will look at whether further information is available in relation to those and whether the original review's assessment of their significance was reasonable.
Richard.
Whether in private homes or public institutions, sadly, child sex abuse is all too prevalent in British society. Therefore, would the Home Secretary look again, for current cases, at the tariff for serious sexual crimes, given that the current tariffs and sentences are clearly not working as a deterrent?
And my honourable friend makes an interesting point. It is a matter which is more properly for the Justice Secretary to look at, and I will ensure that the matter that he has raised is raised with the Justice Secretary.
John Mann.
Operation Fernbridge has been given details of the blocked 1988 investigation into child prostitution, sex rings, prominent people and children's homes in Lambeth. Can we be certain that they have sufficient resources to see whether those files still exist, if not where they've gone, and to prosecute, if possible, those? And in addition, this year, in Bassetlaw, 6 people have come forward making allegations of historic child abuse. There have been no prosecutions. The police have lost files, Nottinghamshire Police. Nottinghamshire Social Services have destroyed files. Will this be part of in the remit of one of these investigations that's now taking place?
In relation to the resources available to Operation Fernbridge, that is a matter for the Commissioner to determine. It's an operational matter for the Commissioner to determine what resources are appropriate for the level of investigation that is necessary. I'm sure we all want the same thing, which is to ensure that perpetrators are brought to justice. One of the issues which the inquiry panel, the whole point of the inquiry panel is to look at lessons learnt as a result of these various reviews of historic allegations that have taken place. And obviously I would expect them to be wide-ranging in ensuring that they are indeed identifying all the lessons that need to be learnt and the actions that need to be taken.
Order. I'm happy to call the honourable gentleman if he can confirm on the record he was here at the start. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Geoffrey Dickinson's former Huddersfield West seat, much of it was incorporated into my Colne Valley constituency, so there's much local interest in my part of the world. I very much welcome the announcement of today's independent inquiries. Will the Home Secretary assure me that it will look into all the evidence and all the allegations, no matter how old they actually are?
Yeah, the point is that the inquiry panel should be able to look at historic allegations and identify what lessons need to be learned from that. As I indicated in response to an earlier question, I think it's appropriate for me to make clear again that it won't be for the inquiry panel to determine a particular allegation. That, of course, if there is an allegation that it is more appropriate for criminal investigation, should be referred to the police for criminal investigation. But it will be looking across the board at these historic allegations and at why it was that so many children in so many different environments, not in the state and the care of the state and in other areas, actually found themselves the victims of this abuse. And apparently nothing was done to protect those children properly.
Mr. Kevin Brennan.
Further to the points made by my friend for West Bromwich East, we know that Special Branch suppressed files alleging criminality in the Cyril Smith case. Allegations have been made that the intelligence services have been involved in the hushing up of police inquiries. will she accept in terms and tell the House today that she accepts completely that without access to these records, including the intelligence services, this new inquiry will not be able to establish the truth?
I have been clear, I had hoped with the House, that it is my intention and expectation that all available material, government papers, should be made available to the inquiry panel. The caveat that I put on that, and I'm sure the honourable gentleman and other honourable and right honourable members of this House will recognise, is that when we're dealing with material, if there is material which is intelligence material, then certain care needs to be taken on in the way in which that material is dealt with. But I intend that, as far as possible, government papers will be made available to the inquiry so that they are able to come to a proper determination.
Mr. Stephen Mosley.
And I welcome the inquiry that the Home Secretary has announced. Much of the discussion that we've had today has been around historical cases. Is my right honourable friend confident if such a bundle of documents was handed to her today, it would be treated in a much better manner?
I would hope that if a similar sort of bundle of documents was handed into the Home Office today, they would ensure that those documents went to the police and that they were properly investigated. In the case of the material that came into previous Home Secretaries, the evidence of the review was that material that should have been handed to the police was handed to the police. But we will be looking to make sure that that was actually what took place. But obviously I would also expect that appropriate records would be kept today if such material was handed to the Home Office, and that the Home Office would make sure that the police were taking those matters on board as appropriately.
Pat Glass.
Can I just press the Home Secretary on the issue of intelligence files? Is she confirming to the House that special branch files not connected to national security will be made available?
I have indicated to the House that I would expect government papers to be made available to the inquiry. I would, though, also remind members of the House that where papers are or information is currently being used in a criminal investigation, we don't want the inquiry's work to in any way jeopardise or prejudice criminal investigations that are taking place. But government has, I've made clear the use of phrase in my statement about making all papers available, government making all papers available to the inquiry, where the inquiry, obviously, it's for the inquiry to determine how, the chairman and the panel to determine how they wish to conduct the inquiry, but government will be open to the inquiry.
Mr. Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome very much the statement that the Home Secretary has made today. Can she just clarify that she agrees with me that the fact that Mr. Sedwill found that of the 114 files that weren't available, there was no evidence that had been removed or destroyed inappropriately, doesn't in any way mean that it isn't deeply concerned that those files have gone missing, and nor does it in any way provide positive evidence that they were not inappropriately removed. It just means that no evidence was provided one way or the other.
The important point is that, as I understand it, the reviewer found that it felt that there was. I've been looking for the exact phrase which I can't find immediately in my papers, but that the question is, were those files of significance? Now, the reviewer looked at the issues that were in terms of the files being identified. Obviously, he wasn't able to look into the files themselves, precisely because there doesn't appear to be a record of whether they had been destroyed or whether they had been mislaid or simply not found. But the purpose of having the review of the review is precisely so it is possible to go back on those issues and to look again at those issues and to make sure, see whether there is further information that is available, that is in the terms of reference of the review of reviews, see whether further information is available about those files and whether indeed they were looked at, the issue was dealt with properly by the investigator.
Michael McCann.
Mr. Speaker, on the 23rd of May 2012, at Prime Minister's questions, I raised the issue of the abuse that took place at Medhamsley Detention Centre. My constituent, Joan McCabe, was raped every day for 9 months by guards and others inside and outside Medhamsley. Joan has waived his anonymity, and because of his courage, 700 victims from Medhamsley have come forward, and 70+ detectives are going through the evidence at County Durham Police Force. What has always puzzled me is that much of the evidence that was available was already in the Home Office's hands. So why didn't the Home Office instigate the investigation? And does the Home Secretary not accept that the only way to get to the truth about the depths to which paedophile circles infiltrated state systems is to cut to the chase and announce a public inquiry today?
Yeah, he should have the job.
I say to the honourable gentleman that we are absolutely clear that the way forward is to ensure that work can start soon, that we do not delay this work because of the impact it could have on the criminal investigations. And I'm sure he talks about a significant number of police officers in the County Durham force who are looking into the allegations of the abuse that took place at the Medhamsley Centre. And I'm sure he would want to ensure that those criminal investigations would continue and that where evidence was found that was suitable for charge and prosecution, those charges were laid and those prosecutions were taken forward. I want to ensure that the work that is now going to be done does not jeopardise the prosecution of perpetrators. That is why I have set this up today as an inquiry panel. But as I made clear in my statement, if the chairman of the panel recommends that actually it would be preferable to move it to a full statutory inquiry, that will be done.
Steve McKay.
I welcome the Home Secretary's statement. Can I ask, when the Sedgwill review specifically established that the Dickens letters hadn't been kept, did it also try to establish who had authorised their disposal? And if not, why not?
The review looked at the way in which the information that had come in from Geoffrey Dickens, and indeed any other information that had come in, was handled to make sure that it was being handled appropriately. And the evidence that it found in the work that it did was that matters that should have been handed over to the police for investigation were indeed handed to the police for investigation. But there were, as I say, 4 pieces of information that have subsequently been passed to the police because it was now felt that it was appropriate to do so. But what the review is going to do is it will look at that whole question of what the investigator did, the evidence that they found, and will be ensuring that that investigation was done properly, that the handling of these matters was entirely appropriate in order to give that greater confidence precisely because questions have been raised.
Mrs. Madeline Moon.
Speaker, in the early 1980s I was working in child protection in South Wales and rumours such as those that have been circulating this weekend were circulated then. Many of the people who would have been working in child protection in the 1980s have now retired. Will there be a confidential access line where people can come forward and reveal what they saw happening then that may not be suitable for a police inquiry, but might well help build a picture of what was prevalent, what was the engagement then, perhaps with the police and with other authorities, when you had concerns about children being picked up at the end of the lane in large cars, but you could get nowhere with your concerns.
It's precisely in order to learn the lessons, we need to know what was going on. And it's precisely in order to be able to know what is going on, the inquiry obviously is going to have to look quite widely and look at the documentary evidence from the reviews that have taken place. But the chairman, I don't want to absolutely dictate to the inquiry exactly what they're going to do and how they're going to undertake their work, but I'm sure that the chairman and the panel will be very alive to the need to ensure that in order to get to the truth, they are able to hear those who have felt perhaps not able to speak out in the past.
Debbie Abrahams.
I also welcome the statement by the Home Secretary today, but can I just press her on the point about the missing 114 files and how the investigator could have concluded, without having sight of them, that they weren't, and I quote from her statement, they hadn't been removed or destroyed inappropriately. Did the Home Secretary ask this herself?
I made absolutely clear earlier, this was a review that was initiated by the Permanent Secretary and reported to the Permanent Secretary, and the review itself has been passed to the police together with any appropriate evidence that was found and it was felt was right to pass to the police. Obviously, the review looked at a large number of files, and put evidence together and considerations together as to how these matters were dealt with in looking at those files. The whole question of how they looked at judgments that were made by the investigator when he undertook that review is the issue, one of the issues that will of course be looked at by the review of the review.
Mr. Andrew Gwynne.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Home Secretary's statement today, and one of the consequences of her establishing an inquiry of the nature that she's announced today may be that victims hitherto unknown to the authorities come forward with new evidence or additional evidence into existing cases. Can she ensure that as part of the terms of reference for the inquiry that there is in place a sensitive and confidential procedure to allow those victims, including new victims, to come forward to present their evidence in a confidential and sensitive manner, and where necessary for that information not just to be shared with the inquiry but also with criminal investigators where appropriate?
As I said in response to the question from his honourable friend, the member for Bridgend, I would expect the inquiry to recognise the need to have appropriate measures in place to enable evidence to come forward from those who might otherwise find it difficult to give their evidence or who have been put off giving their evidence in the past for fear of the consequences.
Order. I'm grateful to the Home Secretary and to colleagues. Statement. The Minister of State for Cities and the Constitution, Minister Greg Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. With
Kenneth Clark's a paedophile.